Hey everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. Today we are joined by Duncan Webb, who is Labour's spokesperson for Justice, Regulation and the Natural Hazards Commission, formerly the Earthquake Commission. Duncan is also the Deputy Shadow Leader of the House and he's the MP for Christchurch Central and has been since 2017. And I'd just like to add that Duncan was actually a professor and a lecturer at Canterbury and Victoria and Massey universities before he got into politics, and he was also a partner in a top legal firm, so he's very, very qualified. Hey Duncan, welcome to G News.
Oh, thank you. That's very flattering of you.
It's
Good
just
to
the
be
truth.
here.
Yeah, it's really good to have you. Hey Duncan, there's been some really, really big developments on the world stage recently, and you've always been pretty staunch and up front when it comes to human rights. And the Labour Party's just come out and it's basically stated that should it be elected, it will recognise the state of Palestine as soon as possible. What's your position on this particular issue?
I don't know. I'm such an optimist. I was listening to Winston Peters when he made his announcement at the United Nations, and I had to listen. I had to kind of listen again because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The massive public opinion, the international weight of evidence, our international partners were all doing the right thing. And for New Zealand to then not recognise the state of Palestine when it had the most obvious opportunity, it was bewildering to me. And it was just really sad because I'm ashamed. It's no other way to put it, that we're not doing what we should. And yes, we actually, in the last manifesto, before all of this terrible tragedy had started, had said that we would invite the Palestinian delegation to present their credentials, not quite recognising the state of Palestine, but recognising the status of the Palestinian delegation to engage in international relations with New Zealand. We've gone further than that now. Absolutely, it's one of the first things we want to do is to recognise the state of Palestine. And people say why? It's to give them the status of an equal nation, to put them around the table. So you don't talk down to them, you talk with them, and recognise that they have as much a right to self-determination as any other nation, including Israel. And that's a really critical point. It's not simply window dressing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we're all pretty gutted actually. And there's a lot of people around New Zealand at the moment saying, I recognise the state of Palestine, even if my government doesn't.
Yeah.
It's just shameful. So let's move on to the justice portfolio and what has been happening within that portfolio with this government. Recently, Paul Goldsmith has made some comments about tikanga and how tikanga is getting in the way of investment, which is a crazy thing to say because subsequently National has not been able to point at any evidence or cite any examples where that is the case at all. So it's totally a stray comment that they can't back it up. Now, isn't tikanga a little bit more similar to the way that common law is bespoke? What's your view on what Paul Goldsmith is up to
Yeah.
here?
I, Look, Paul Goldsmith's actually a historian, and he should know better. It just perplexes me why people are so wound up about the idea that underlying our society is a set of customs and practices which the law ought to recognise. Because in fact, the law system that we've inherited, as you point out from England largely, recognises the place of traditional practices. Now, admittedly, in England, they were traditional English practices, and there's all these stories about the right to roam and fishing in this stream and riparian rights, all kinds of things like that, which are simply customary rights, which the law over centuries has come to recognise. And there's a whole area of English law around customary law. And tikanga is no different from that. And what it's saying is that there is a set of long-standing and recognised cultural practices, which may differ from place to place, but they form part of our law, so that when we come to make decisions, and reasonable decisions are the most obvious ones, that we need to just, that is part of the conversation that we need to have. There's nothing alarming, there's actually nothing frightening, and there's certainly nothing which the law isn't used to accommodating. And as you point out, I mean, this has come up time and again. Principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill was one where they were saying, oh, the Treaty of Waitangi has caused us all this heartache. No one could come up with any concrete examples as to where it had really kind of obstructed. And in fact, the fact of the matter is, what we actually see by people who engage is that it can lead to better overall outcomes because it's bringing along all of our communities and not just one of them.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? So one of the really big stories that's come out within the Justice portfolio is the gerrymandering, what looks like the gerrymandering of the electoral system to me. Last week in the Justice Select Committee, you busted the fact that it will actually take the Electoral Commission just the exact same amount of time to count all the votes and come up with a result like it did in the 2023 election, despite the fact that this government has shifted the last date that people can enrol to 13 days before election day. And they justified that change really on the basis that it was taking too long and it was going to take way too long. But we found out from the Electoral Commission, thanks to you, that this change isn't going to speed anything up. So why are we even doing this? What do you make of all of this?
Well, that was one of my questions. I was gobsmacked, right? I'm in the Select Committee, and submissions. We've got the Electoral Commission, which is really good. It was great to have them there, and I thought there's a really good opportunity to understand exactly what's going to happen, how this is going to work. And I did not go into that meeting with a plan to kind of bust it. I just wanted to know, and so they gave us a piece of paper which showed a comparison between the two counting dates, and I honestly was sure I'd missed something, because when I asked, I'm just looking at this document, how many days quicker? That was a genuine question, and when they came back and said none, it was, I was floored. And then, because I asked the question again, I was like, that can't be right. Absolutely right, none. And then, as you prefaced there, my next question was, again, a kind of naive question: why? So
Yeah.
what's the reason?
Yeah.
And their response to that was as surprising. We didn't want this change, or their exact words, I think, were, we did not recommend this change. So the Electoral Commission does not want to close off voting enrolments sooner. They think it's a bad idea, and it is, for the very reason you point out. And Henry Cook did a great piece on this, pointed out that there's around 50,000 special votes where people will go to a voting place thinking that they're all good to vote. Their votes will be taken, but they'll be disallowed because they're not correctly enrolled. So 50,000 votes is the number of votes, more than the number of votes that's cast in many electorates. So it's an electorate's worth of votes that will be disallowed. And the point to be made is that this can change the outcome of an election. And the fact of the matter is that the Ministry for Justice, in its analysis, said this is going to be Māori, Pacifica, Asian peoples, but also if you think about it, it's going to be busy people, it's going to be working people, it's going to be people with kids, and all those people whose lives get really busy. And now when they finally turn their mind to the election, which is what most people, unlike you and me, most people don't think about elections until, it's 2 weeks to go, the door's shut, slammed in their face. And this is, probably other than prisoner voting, which we can talk about, but this is the first time you've seen a real retreat in the franchise. So New Zealand, for the first time, is moving the needle away from universal voting. That is 19th century shit.
It's bad, isn't it? I mean, it's even worse because not only are they kind of making it harder to vote, but it's also the case that they're actually name-calling the public, calling them dropkicks. And you've got the Prime Minister I think pretty much accusing the Electoral Commission of being the slowest people on earth, like really as if they were lazy or something, while he's refusing to give them any more resources. I
Yeah,
mean, it's just
there's two
awful.
things in there, right? First of all, he should butt out of telling the Electoral Commission what to do.
Exactly.
That is our democracy he's talking to. That is the custodians of our election. And the last thing the Prime Minister should be doing is giving his reckons on how they should be conducting an election. That is something that we see in fragile democracies. And our democracy, it might be under a bit of a siege, but it's still a respected democracy, and let's keep it that way, And the fact of the matter is that the count takes as long as the count takes. It takes that long because we have special votes, because we have a system which actually tries to enable as many people as possible to vote wherever they are, whether they're in the electorate or outside of the electorate. It's a really good system. And you're right, there's a genuine question there about whether the Electoral Commission has been funded appropriately. There's a good argument to say that, these timeliness issues, if there is an issue, I actually don't think it's a great issue, but some more resources would go a long way to assisting in that.
You made the point there about the Prime Minister actually like straying into the territory of independent agencies. And we've seen this is turning into a pattern because he's started to allude to how he gives his reckons to the Reserve Bank at one point. Now he's kind of like criticising the Electoral Commission. And it's coming across like this guy isn't being briefed, doesn't know that, where the boundaries are. It's
Well, look, this is an inexperienced leader, right? His inexperience is showing through on a whole lot of fronts, and his failure to understand kind of the oil that keeps our constitutional ticking over, the respect that you show for different entities, whether it's the Independent Electoral Commission, whether it's the courts and judges' decisions. But this is not something that this leader and a number of our other politicians are particularly interested in.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing quite a lot from Paul Goldsmith and the Justice portfolio. And I just want to ask, is what we're seeing, a lot of what we're seeing from Paul Goldsmith, really just performative, sort of like get tough on crime with longer sentences? And how much of what you're seeing from Paul Goldsmith is really about evidence and deterrence and running a better justice system in your view?
Well, yeah, I mean, it'd be nice if it was performative in the sense that it was a bit of a show and it was over. But the fact of the matter is that what he's doing is appealing to people's kind of basest instincts in some ways, right? Let's be upfront. I think it's really important though that serious crime is a genuine social issue that we need to address. And when you see the harm that it causes to victims, we have a visceral reaction to it, and victims, families, and the wider communities kind of demand some kind of vengeance, right? It's a real. That's what I mean when it's visceral. Now, I get that, and we can't ignore it in a justice policy, but the needle on this has just flipped the entire other way. And so we've got things like the 3 strikes legislation, which has, or the other one is boot camps, right? There's zero evidence. Boot camps is a really good example because there's evidence the other way. We know boot camps can be harmful. And we can see from the evidence of our own trial, the trial that has been conducted, that it is an abject failure. So why are they insisting on it? 3 strikes. We know it has no impact. We know it doesn't decrease serious crime. Particularly the violent crimes that it is directed at are crimes that people make when they're in the height of anger, when they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol or mental illness, and for there to be some kind of economic analysis of, if I do this, what will the consequences be, and some trade-off. It is not how crimes in our communities work. So we know it doesn't work. The correction system isn't the solution. It might be a holding pen, but we need to address, the absolute causes of crime in a much more robust and comprehensive way.
Could you talk us through three strikes, what it is, and why Labor repealed it, what the rehash looks like, and how this impacts a fair sentence and takes away discretion from judges?
Yeah, well, I mean, Labor repealed three strikes basically for two reasons. One, it was grossly unjust, and probably even more important, it simply didn't work. I mean, three strikes is got kind of a catchy name, but fundamentally the rule is if you are convicted of three serious offences, on your third offence you go to jail for the maximum period of time set out in the Act without parole. Now, we know that there's a continuum of offending, right? And the cases showed that there were certain cases where on that third strike, it was utterly disproportionate. And there's two classic cases. One was the Fitzgerald case, which was a person who was, mentally not particularly competent, not insane, but not, very well, and he kissed someone. And he was sent to prison until the appeals went through for 7 years, right? The other one was another indecent assault, and it was a prisoner in jail who slapped a prison guard on the bottom. Again, 7 years for that offence. So grossly disproportionate is the first point, that and removing all discretion from judges to have a sentence that fits the offender. It's been pitched as kind of getting tough on crime and real consequences of crime, as if offenders actually take into account the three strikes regime before they engage in offending. And we know that's simply not true. There is no evidence at all. We've trialled it once, right, under the last national government. There is no evidence that the three strikes regime reduces offending. And if you think about it, this serious violent and sexual offending is not offending where people are in a space to think carefully about their behaviour. They're often driven by anger or by drug addiction or by mental health issues. And so this three strikes regime simply doesn't work. The new regime's slightly different. It's got a kind of a tiny bit of judicial discretion where a sentence is manifestly unjust, but that's a very high threshold. The whole idea of this regime is to over-punish people, to impose a sentence. And I put this to Paul Goldsmith. I said, are you intending for these sentences to be disproportionate? He looked at me like I was an idiot and said, yes, that's the whole idea. Which to me is for a Minister of Justice is truly extraordinary. I mean, sentencing is tough, but one of the values underpinning our sentencing system is for a judge to take into account all of the offending, all of the impacts on the victim, and all of the nature of the offender. The question is both how do we punish it, and that's the kind of vengeance aspect of it that we need to front up to, but also how do we reduce the risk that there will be reoffending in the future. This government is taking an American approach, which is putting people in prison just to keep them out of the community, just an isolationist approach. Whereas most developed nations take the approach that the corrections system, however you frame it, and the sentencing framework should be addressing the causes of offending as well as doing the other thing, which is kind of politely called marking out the offending, the opprobrium of the community, but it's really a little bit about punishment, vengeance, community anger, and so on.
When it comes to the gang patch ban, what harms have happened, and what's the situation that we're finding ourselves in today?
Well, look, if the purpose of the gang patch ban was to make people make a part of our community feel better because they don't see patched gang members with mob and black power and common heroes patches on their back, well, it's worked because there are less of them. If it was to address the issue of gang numbers, meth harm, it's been an abject failure, right? Because gang numbers are up, meth consumption is skyrocketing, and there's still the same problems in our community. And of course, we've got the kind of unusual situation now where a judge on a couple of occasions has given the gang patch that has been confiscated back to the gang member. So they can't even write the law right, let alone enforce it.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so the Treaty Principles Bill, let's go back to that, and let's just talk a bit about democracy. The Treaty Principles Bill, and now I guess with the Regulatory Standards Bill in a similar way, what we are seeing in the effect on democracy with this kind of legislation, we're seeing select committee truncation, and we're only seeing like a certain number of submissions that get made to select committee being read. What's your thoughts on that, on this kind of trend?
Yeah, well, look, honestly, the Treaty Principles Bill was a terrible piece of work because it was utterly political. It was never going to progress and deeply divisive. And so, in some ways, the fact that it had a strange process is more understandable, if I can put it that way, than the Regulatory Standards Bill. Because it was overwhelmingly opposed. There was a small fraction of the community who thought the Treaty Principles Bill was a good idea, and it was a pretty, niche, to put it politely. The Regulatory Standards Bill was to me, much more concerning because whilst there were many, over 100,000 submissions relating to it, it's actually going to pass, and it's likely to pass in something like its original form. There'll be some tweaks. There always is in a select committee. But this is David Seymour's baby, and he is clever because the Treaty Principles Bill was all, noise and so on, but he always knew where that was going to end up. This is his real game because this is actually, the Treaty Principles Bill was noise. This is rebuilding the constitutional foundations of New Zealand. And what it's actually doing is putting in as a right the right to private property. Just like the Bill of Rights Act puts in rights around voting and freedom from arrest, this is saying it is a fundamental part of our lawmaking that we must turn our mind to the protection of private property rights when we pass a law. Now, sure, that is something that you do, but to put that in legislation and then to have a regulatory standards board whose job it is to go back and point out when that doesn't happen or doesn't happen effectively is really disturbing.
Yeah, that board. Could you talk about how that board's kind of been appointed and, some of the impacts around the way in which this all kind of looks a little bit like Davey Seymour's mates?
Well, and David Seymour's hand has been in a number of appointments which have been of concern. And certainly, however the ultimate appointment process falls out, David Seymour will have a major say. On its current drafting, the bill says that David Seymour basically gets to handpick the members of this Regulatory Standards Board, which sounds like an innocuous name, but you could call it the, Private Property Rights Commission. It's got a significant role to play in calling out, if you like, situations where his view of what good laws aren't adhered to. And again, on the current framing of the bill, he could fire people at will, without cause. So unlike most appointments where you only get fired for serious, to independent bodies, Electoral Commission, Human Rights Commission, whatever you like, you only get dismissed for, serious misconduct or inability to discharge your function for health or mental health reasons or something like that. Then, he can just say, I really don't like what you said in that last opinion of yours, you're out. And that is a deeply worrying framework for a board which has that kind of influence.
Yeah, it's kind of like David Seymour's the king, and, these are his subjects. Thank you very much for your time today, Duncan. It's been awesome to actually listen to your expert opinion and where Labour's coming from on a range of issues in your portfolios.
Welcome to G News, the good news.